The story begins with our protagonist, Tarou Satu, hitting a goblin with his arrow along with other people. He cheered for himself, feeling proud of hitting the goblin. However, he then heard something beside him and saw a massive goblin growling angrily. The huge goblin furiously hit the ground and hurled a large stone toward him. He was shocked but managed to dodge it in time. He quickly adjusted his footing, aimed his arrow at the enormous goblin, and let it fly. Tarou Satu was an adventurer who had always dreamt of being in another world. Ever since he was a child, he had been obsessed with isekai fantasies. In elementary school, he even started a magic club and became deeply engrossed in research. He took it a bit too far and even made the news, making him consider giving up his dream. However, he couldn't let go of his longing for another world. He attended a prestigious university known for its challenging academics and had the opportunity to join their century-old dark magic society. Now, he saw his hard work paying off and excitedly exclaimed that the next day was the big day. He had spent his entire life researching how to reach another world. He knew that people usually end up in another world by accident, like getting hit by an isekai truck, but he was going there intentionally. He vowed to find great friends, complete quests, and enjoy the isekai world he had always dreamt of. He gazed at the symbol he had drawn, realizing it meant everything to him. Then, he rummaged through his bag, pulled out a small knife, and made a tiny cut on his finger. He dripped his blood onto the symbol, thinking that with the society's century-long history, and the data gathered by his seniors, along with his calculations, this should be the final step. As his blood touched the center of the symbol, he raised his hands and waited for the next turn of events. However, when nothing happened, he anxiously tried to activate it by moving around the symbol. Unfortunately, it still didn't work. In his desperation, he noticed his stiff toy on the shelf, grabbed it, and placed it within the symbol. He apologized to it because it would be his sacrifice. He placed the teddy bear in the center and asked, "How about it?" He waited for a little while, but it still didn't react, which left him feeling disappointed. He wondered why there was still nothing happening. So, he stood up, looked at his teddy bear for a moment, turned around, and was about to leave the symbol. But then, a light suddenly emerged from the symbol, which shocked him. He couldn't believe it and wondered if this could be it. Excitedly, he shouted that he had finally managed to do it. However, at that moment, hands grabbed his neck, leaving him confused. The hands lifted him up, making it difficult for him to breathe, and he died in just a minute. Slowly, he opened his eyes and heard someone telling God that he seemed to have regained consciousness. He opened his eyes completely and saw a lady and an old man in front of him. The old man scolded him for doing something foolish, which made him worried and confused. The old man showed him a system and asked him to take a look. He was shocked to see a news report stating that in the Empire University Club room, a fourth-year student named Tarou Satu had been found dead. This made him wonder if it was him, and if he died, it made him realize that he was now a dead person. Still, he cheerfully asked them if the magic still worked. The old man frustratingly replied, yes, but told him that in his world, Earth, the gods never taught humans magic. So, it was surprising how he discovered it on his own while he was looking around. The old man told him that it was indeed impressive, but the magic circle he drew was not one for transportation, but instead, it was for reincarnation. He asked the old man what he meant. The old man explained that it was also an incomplete one since he didn't specify a destination or a purpose. He thought for a moment and then panically shouted that he messed up. After he calmed down, he told the old man that he needed to switch gears and excitedly asked if he was going to be reincarnated. He thought that since he had always been fascinated by other worlds, he couldn't let that chance slip away. If he was dead, he might as well go to another world. The old man replied that he would be reincarnated but explained to him that reincarnation was abolished a long time ago, which shocked him. The old man told him that it was only recently reinstated because of the new soul recycling law. He asked the old man what he meant by the soul recycling law, and the old man replied that, in short, using magic for reincarnation counted as suicide since he died in the process. He was shocked to hear it and asked if he really committed suicide. The old man replied that suicide was unforgivable, and the act of killing oneself counted against him in the reincarnation process. Besides, there were also those who would scheme and try to retain their previous life's abilities, so many ended up in terrible situations in their next lives. He asked the old man how terrible it was, and the old man replied that it was like being born but dying immediately, being born into misfortune, sold into slavery by cruel parents, or even reincarnating as beasts, demons, or insects. Those were situations where he was grateful for just being able to live. Hearing the old man's words, he turned white as a ghost in fear and shouted that there was no way he would become like that. Then he shakily told the old man that he was willing to be anything, but not a beast, demons, or insects. The old man sadly told him that there was not much he could do, but he still asked him about cheating skills. The old man asked the lady what cheating skills are, but the lady shrugged her shoulders, acting like she didn't know either. The old man asked him if he was talking about special skills and told him that they existed in the world he managed, but there was nothing too overpowered. He sweetly asked the old man if he could have that special skill when he reincarnates, and the old man replied that special skills are useful, but they take time and effort to activate. Plus, their activation conditions are often difficult to meet. He realized that it was a risk worth taking, and starting from a disadvantage means he'll need more than just regular skills, so he asked the old man if he could have the most special skill. The man laughed while telling him that he was still asking even after everything he had said, and since he was the first person to be reincarnated after the ban, he might consider it, but he can't play favorites. Then the old man seriously asked him if he was still willing to do it. He clenched his fists and teeth, then confidently replied yes, knowing that he couldn't back down now. The old man told him that before he misunderstood, all the memories from his previous life would be erased, making him shocked, and he told the old man that it was new to him. The old man reminded him that he had told him he couldn't play favorites, so he asked the old man if even their conversation right now would be erased. The old man replied that everything would be erased before reincarnation, and he couldn't expect to cheat the system. He panicked hearing it and was about to tell the old man that maybe he'll just go with a regular skill, but then a system pop-up showed him that his death was unnatural. Then the system released a light that hit his head, his neck, his chest, and every part of his body. Then it directly flew down to the earth, then it flew down to the city, passed through the people on the street. People talking, a lady near the alley, those inside the alley where kids were beating someone, saying that it was boring because there is not a single valuable thing on him. Then the soul entered the beaten kid on the ground, making the kid wake up and see 3 kids walking away. But then his vision slowly blurred, and his eyes slowly closed. Then a light showed him that his special skill is unknown, the condition 1 is rebirth after death confirmed, and he acquired the memories of his previous life. He opened his eyes once again and remembered everything. He tried to stand up, knowing that it was close, and noticed that he was in a tough spot. But he knew he hadn't done anything extraordinary yet. He was glad he managed to reincarnate and regain his memories. Because of it, he couldn't die there. His name is Tauro Satu, and in his previous life, he was Tarou Satu. During a baptismal ceremony at age 6, it was revealed that he had a worthless skill called Garbled Text. Due to this, his alcoholic father decided to abandon him in a forest overrun with monsters. This was the reason he fled to a relatively large town named Saishi, which was a few days away from his village. Life was a struggle, and he barely got a meal every few days. He was in pain, wondering what he should do now. He had no money, was weak, and still a child. The adults didn't seem to pity him either. The obvious choice in that other world was unclear. He walked down the street, hiding his face from people. He stopped at a large building and saw that it was the Adventurers Guild. He opened the guild's door, but 4 members surrounded him, telling him to get lost because it was the Adventurers Guild. Ignoring them, he walked past, but someone grabbed his coat from behind and lifted him up, telling him not to ignore them. Then the lady called the man Mob and shouted that there should be no violence. Mob lowered him and placed him in front of the lady at the desk. The lady whispered to him that Mob intentionally spoke to him first so that other adventurers wouldn't bother him. He looked at Mob and was glad he had finally found a kind person in that world. Then he told the lady that he'd like to register, but she broke the news that there was a registration fee, shocking him and making him shout that it was news to him. But then he felt a sense of deja vu. He asked the lady how much the registration fee was, and she replied that it was 10 silver coins. This made him realize that he was in trouble, as 10 silver coins in this world were like 10,000 yen in his previous world. He was willing to register even if he had to borrow money, but his current situation was already precarious. Additionally, he had run away from the village, so he had no one to vouch for his identity. However, Mob threw a bag of coins at him, saying that he'd cover the cost for him. He looked at Mob in shock. Then, one of the adventurers told Mob that once the kid got the tag, he might run away. Mob told the adventurer that this was the point, and they should make a bet to see if the kid would work hard and repay the 10 silver coins he lent him. The adventurer thought it wasn't much of a bet and said that no one would bet on a kid. However, Mob insisted he was betting on the kid. So, the adventurer bet 15 silver coins that the kid would run, another bet 5 silver coins that the kid would slack off, and 20 that he'd drop dead before repaying. Tauro looked at Mob and thought that despite Mob's tough exterior, he was definitely a good person. He thanked Mob, but Mob patted his head and told him not to get the wrong idea. The lady whispered to him that it was good for him. She explained that Mob was an orphan who became an adventurer after a difficult life, so Mob probably saw a bit of himself in Tauro. They should proceed with his registration. The lady introduced herself as Nay and instructed Tauro to touch the shining ball, which resembled the crystal ball from the baptism ceremony. When he touched it, a powerful light emanated, and a paper with writings appeared. Nay saw that his name was Tauro and was shocked to see that his skill was the Garbled Text. Nay was silent while looking at it, and he asked her what the Garbled Text skill is. She replied that, for example, lancer and sewing, and by constantly practicing lancing techniques and clothing-related activities, one can improve their abilities and unlock unique skills. The voice of the world will guide them in acquiring these skills. He asked if she said the voice of the world, and she replied, yes, then told him that it was also referred to as the voice of the heavens and guides everyone in unlocking their abilities, to which he replied that he understood. He wondered if it could be the same voice he heard when he was on the brink of death and regained the memories of his past life. Nay excitedly told him that since he has the Garbled Text skill, he probably doesn't know in which field he should specialize, but trying various things should give him some clarity, and he should give his best effort. He replied that he would and thanked her so much. Nay told him to wait there, and he saw that she was heading to something that looked like a magical photocopier. Nay opened the lid to put the paper inside and closed it, making him shocked that it was indeed a magical photocopier. She grabbed something on the other side and gave the tag to him while telling him that it was his tag, proving that he was a member of the Adventurers Guild. He thanked her and looked at his tag, where he saw his name. Then she reminded him that he should wear it around his neck, so he did, and she excitedly told him to let her explain about the Adventurers Guild. She explained to him that it operates on a ranking system, starting with G rank for beginners, and the advancements are G-, G, G+, F-, and so on, making him realize that it seems like a long journey for him to climb up those ranks. She also told him that once he reached B rank and above, he was considered elite, and the highest rank was S+. But he should beware because any crimes he committed would be recorded on his tag, and once he committed a crime, he would be expelled from the guild on the spot. Also, he would be handed over to the guards regardless of the severity of the offense. She told him that there are many rough adventurers out there, but most of them follow the rules and complete their quests, so he shouldn't worry, making him think that they seem rough, but they are actually decent folks. He told Nay that he'd like to start a quest soon. She told him to calm down because it was lunchtime, and as a celebration for him becoming an adventurer, lunch was on her, making him excited, and thanked her. A minute later, in a tavern, Nay served him food. He saw ham-stuffed mushroom soup and Dutch oven bread, making him drool and tearful with hunger. He dipped the bread into the soup and immediately put it in his mouth. His tears flowed down his cheeks because it tasted so good. Nay looked at him with a smile and told him that she had been curious. Then she asked if he came from a well-off family because he was polite and had good table manners. But she added that he didn't have to answer if it was a sensitive topic. He replied that his family was just a household of poor farmers, and his mother had passed away shortly after he was born. At 6 years old, he ran away from home because they had planned to abandon him in the forest. They asked if it was because they wanted to reduce the number of mouths to feed, and he replied that it was something like that. He then told her that they would often beat and kick him, so he wasn't attached to them at all. He looked sadly at the bull, remembering that the journey to that city was tough. A huge bull monster attacked him, but then something attacked the bull, and he saw another monster attacking it. This made him jump in shock and fear. He managed to reach the city of Saishi, but it wasn't kind to the weak like him. They would always fight for the leftovers they managed to find, and barely surviving was his daily routine. But thanks to that meal, he drank the leftover soup in the bowl, knowing that he could live for a few more days thanks to it, while Nay looked at him with a smile. Later, he called Nay, who was busy at the desk, and told her that he had completed the gutter cleaning quest while he's covered in dirt. She informed him that there was a well in the back, so he should freshen up. She added that the spare clothes might be a bit big, but he could still wear them. He thanked her profusely and walked into the back of the guild, where he saw the well. He put down the bucket to get the water. Just as he was about to lift the bucket up, someone shouted, saying he smells bad, making him let go of the bucket full of water. He looked up and saw a man at his side. He was angry hearing it, and he told the man that he smelled too. The man became angry upon hearing this and dared him to say it again. Then, the man pushed him away while commenting that he looked and smelled as if he hadn't taken a bath in a long time. Even the rags he was wearing had changed color due to the dirt. The man told him he had no choice and would heat up some water. He shouted, "Go take a bath." He was still angry for a moment, but then he realized that the bearded man was kind. The man poured water into a large bucket and wondered how he would heat it up. The man chanted, and fire come out from his hand. Then, the man put his hand inside the bucket of water, which made him wonder if it was magic. The water began to boil, amazing him. The man slapped his head and told him to hurry up and get in. He tested the water with his finger, excited that it was his first bath in a long time. If he counted his previous life, it had been 8 years. Then, the man lifted him up and placed him in the large bucket. The man quickly washed his head and ordered him to get his hands moving. To which he replied, yes. Minutes later, he finished showering and felt refreshed. A voice informed him that his special skill had activated. A condition from scrubbing off years of accumulated grime had been met, confirming the acquisition of the purification spell. The man asked him what was wrong, and he explained that he had heard the voice of the world just now and seemed to have learned purification. The man told him that the condition for him to learn the purification spell must have been the bath and asked if it varied from person to person. The man replied that it did, and the same skill could be acquired through different means. He also mentioned that innate talents played a role in it. One way to learn fire-based spells would be to continuously interact with fire, and the key to learning a skill is trying out different approaches. Still, no one would have thought that he'd learn a rare spell under such a condition. He was shocked to hear that it was a rare spell, and the old man gave him a shirt to wear. He thanked the man profusely. The man told him that there was no need to thank him and that he'd take a bath himself, so he should leave. Later, he was busy looking at the quests board when Nay called him and told him that their guild's branch chief wanted to have a word with him. He wondered what such an esteemed person could possibly want from him. A minute later, he knocked on the door and asked if he could come in, to which the person from inside replied, "Go ahead." He entered and was shocked to see the bearded man. They told him to mind his manners because it was their branch chief, Leo, which made him even more shocked. He bowed down while telling Leo that he wanted to thank him for earlier, and Leo told him that it was fine, so he should take a seat. Leo mentioned that he had heard from Nay that he had no money and no place to stay, to which he replied, yes. Leo then offered him a deal. The guild had a vacant room with a bed, and he was free to use it in the meantime. But in exchange, he had to help with the cleaning and assist Nay and the rest of the guild staff. Of course, he would be paid for his work. He excitedly asked Leo if he was sure, and Leo replied that Nay had been quite adamant about it, so it was the least he could do. Leo mentioned that he might have borrowed from Mobe, but he was still an adventurer through and through. Then Leo advised him not to run away without settling his debt, as it would stain both his record and the Adventurers Guild's trust. He better behave with the honor expected of an adventurer, to which he replied, yes. Leo also noticed that he seemed to have hurt his head, so he suggested getting that wound treated in the medical room with their magic and told him that he was dismissed. He exited the room while excitedly thanking Leo, and Leo told Nay that, just like she and Mobe mentioned, there was still a spark in Toro's eyes. Leo also mentioned that while the Garbled Text skill has its drawbacks, it should at least get Toro through day-to-day life. On the other hand, in the spare room, he was amazed to see the place. He straightaway jumped onto the bed while excitedly shouting that he finally had his own bed again. Then he jumped in happiness and told himself that they should do their best tomorrow. But the next day, he was panicking because he overslept. So he immediately got up and apologized to Nay for oversleeping. Nay just greeted him with a good morning and told him to take it easy because knowing how yesterday was for him, she chose to let him sleep in. He waved goodbye to her while telling her that he was off to work. She told him that they were counting on him. Then he started to clean the walls and floor. He noticed that they seemed busy with something. He asked them if there was anything he could do to help. One of them replied that there was a lot, but he didn't think he knew how to read. He told them that he could read and write just fine and that he also knows arithmetic, so he should be able to handle it if it's something like simple document filing, making him glad for his past life's memories. The adventurers were shocked to hear his words. Someone grabbed his shoulder and asked him if he could really read, write, and do arithmetic. He replied yes, and Nay told him to help them. The adventurers couldn't believe it. One of them said that the only thing she knows how to read and write is her name. The other said that he can't even write. The other said that he can count up to 10, but his friend told the adventurer that he's just adding and subtracting using his hands. After collecting everything, he walked while holding the papers, but then he stopped walking and remembered that he hadn't done any quests today, which means his earnings are 0, making Nay panic and reminding him about the papers. A few days later, he noticed that his days had been busy ever since he started staying at the guild. Helping with guild work day and night meant he didn't have time to relax. He completed beginner escorting quests during the day and even became accustomed to tiring physical labor. In just over half a month, he was able to repay his debt to Mobe. He called Mobe, who was at the desk, and thanked him for lending him money. Mobe told him not to mention it and shouted that those who bet on Toro falling should pay up because Toro had returned the money. The adventurers who bet were shocked to hear this, and Mobe angrily asked them what that was supposed to mean. After collecting the bets, Mobe told him that he made that much money because of him, so he gave him his share. This made him teary-eyed because Mobe is so kind. Then Nay gave him today's payday and asked him why he doesn't use that money for his needs. He explained that he had ranked up from G- to G, so he might as well, knowing that once he reached F-, he'd be able to do herb gathering quests in the forest or defeat one-horned hares and the like. So he decided that he was going shopping today. He went outside of the guild, thinking that shopping back in his world wasn't something he looked forward to, but shopping in his long-admired other world is super fun. Later, he saw the shop and thought it must be the second-hand shop Nay told him about. He remembered Nay telling him to make sure to size up because children grow fast, so he thought he would buy oversized clothes and a cape to shelter himself from the rain. After that, his next stop was the weaponry shop. He arrived at the shop and realized Nay sure had good connections because she even knew of a shop like that. Then he remembered that according to Nay, the shop is run by dwarves, but he had never seen a dwarf before. He thought it was rare to see sub-races aside from humans in that town, but he had met beast folk at the Adventurers Guild, so he wondered how his first encounter with dwarves would go. Then he entered the shop and called for the owner. Then he was amazed to see the equipment and wondered where the shopkeeper was. Someone from behind told him to look at their wares while he waited a bit, but after a few minutes, no one came. So, he decided to look behind, thinking that the shopkeeper said a bit. But the shopkeeper sure was taking his time and wondering if the shopkeeper is still busy. The shopkeeper, who was busy doing something, looked back and saw him, which made him remember that there was a customer. The old man asked him if he was a kid, and he replied yes. The old man asked him if he was sent there by his parents, and he replied no. Then he asked the old man if he wasn't going to temper it while pointing at the sword. But the old man just asked him back what it was. He replied that he was not that knowledgeable about it either, but it's when he strikes while the iron is still hot and then pours water over it to temper it. Also, apparently, it is how he hardened the iron. The old man told him that it was the first time he had heard of it, but it did sound pretty logical and asked him wouldn't it bend the iron. But then the old man thinks that he could always just regulate the force he used. Then the old man looked at the sword behind him in sweat and pointed to somewhere while telling that daggers that suit his needs are on the shelf over there, so he should go pick one. He was giving him one on the house as thanks for telling him about tempering. He was amazed to hear it and asked the old man if he was sure, but he was shocked to see that the old man was working again and realized that the old man was itching to put it to use right away. So, he just grabbed one of the daggers while telling the old man that he'll take him up on his kind offer. After he grabbed it, he positioned himself, swung his dagger around, and asked the old man what he thought. But the old man didn't answer because he was busy working, making him wonder if the old man was just going to ignore him. He thanked the old man for the dagger and said that he'll be taking his leave, to which the old man replied sure, making him think that it was supposed to be today's highlights, but it went differently from how he expected. Later, after Nay saw his things, she told him that at his age, it was totally acceptable to choose something showy. He told her that they were much more comfortable than the clothes he had been wearing, so he told himself to just shake it off. She told him that his raincoat wasn't half bad and even if he got it appraised, the material was somewhat defective, but it was cheap, so he was fine. He asks what is appraised, knowing that in other words, he was bound to hear in a different world. She explained to him that it was one of her skills and that she could use it on objects. He asks her if she can appraise people, and she replies that only a section of her ability has been unlocked so far, so she can't. But it's still plenty useful on objects, and she can use it to appraise loot he gets from quests, and it saves her from getting duped by merchants. But it's become a more versatile ability since then. He asked her what she had to do to be able to use it on people, and she replied that she had to meet the requirements, and the skills rank was a factor too. Then she gave him an example that if he has an S appraisal rank, he can appraise anything once he clears the necessary conditions, but if it's G rank, he can never appraise people, no matter how much he tries to fulfill the criteria. Also, she hears he can even identify personal talents with an S appraisal rank, and he told her that in that case, it might help him find out what his Garbled Text skill really was, to which she replied that it might be possible. He told her that he recently learned the purifying skill but asked her if Garbled Text can be learned similarly by clearing the conditions and all. She was shocked to hear that he had learned to purify and told him that it was a rare spell learned by healers. Then she told him that perhaps his Garbled Text skill is a healing one, and he asked her if it was how it works. She replied that he had one skill with Garbled Text, so he must be a healer if he were able to learn to purify. But then she remembered something and asked him if he also learned the spell Cleanse, but he replied no, making her shocked, and he panicked, asking her if it was bad. She explained to him that purifying is a high-ranking skill learned by healers, but in order to learn it, he must first know the low-ranking skill, Cleanse, and the middle-ranking skill, Purge, before he acquires the high-ranking skill, Purify. Still, in his case, he learned to purify right away, so it doesn't make him a healer. Then she thinks of a skill that lets him learn to purify instantly, and she thinks seriously for a moment while he was excitedly waiting for her answer, but she apologizes to him because she has never heard of one like it, making him shocked. So, the mystery of Tauro's Garbled Text skill only deepens. The next day, he was busy training his dagger outside when Nay called him and told him to come there for a moment. He stopped and asked her what it was. She told him that he had done a great job at work today and gave him his pay, making him happy and glad because he had been meaning to buy all sorts of things. But he knew that he couldn't buy them all at once, so he needed to list them in order of priority. Mob asked him what he was up to because he looked like he was having fun, but he just happily walked away, making Mob think that something was not right and shouted at him. But then he accidentally bumped into someone on the way, and he apologized to Leo. Leo asked him if he was okay, and he excitedly replied that he got his second pay of the day today, making Mob laugh. Leo happily told him that seeing how pumped he was, he should take today off, and he happily thanked Leo. Then he waved them goodbye because he was heading out. Mob and Leo smiled as they looked at him. A minute later, he stopped walking and remembered that he needed to say thanks to Angus, who was the dwarf shopkeeper. While he was heading to the shop, he saw people outside and proceeded to walk toward Angus's shop. He knocked on the door and walked inside, wondering if Angus was not inside his shop. Then he walked to the back door, thinking that he was not there as a customer today, and called Angus to ask where he was. Angus asked who was there and if he was the boy from last time. He replied that he wanted to thank him for giving him one of his daggers. But then Angus lifted him up while telling him that it could wait, and tempering the iron made it harder but also more brittle. Then he asked him what should he do. He told Angus to calm down because he was hurting him. Angus panicked and released him, apologizing to him. Then he told him that he had been experimenting with all sorts of things since then, and they had become harder but also more brittle, making him shout in his head that there was no point in doing it. He told Angus that a way to strengthen tempered metal is by annealing, and tempering and annealing go hand in hand. Then he told Angus that when he struck the iron at a temperature lower than when he tempered it, it apparently became more durable and less prone to breaking. During the tempering process, he should apply a special clay called Yakibutsuchai to the blade, which makes it cool faster and get harder. Angus replied that he understood. Then he told Angus that if he did all of it, the weapons should come out nicely. Angus got excited and thanked him. Then he told him that he thought he saw a glimmer of light and he should allow him to call him Master. But he told Angus that Master is too much because he simply shared with him what he knew. Suddenly, the voice told him that his special skill activation, the condition of being adept at recognizing what experts truly revere, was confirmed. As a result, he had obtained the Eyes of Truth, which made him confused and wonder if it was an appraisal ability. Angus told him that he'd make something good using the information he gave him and he should come to see him in a month, to which he bowed to Angus and thanked him. Then he told Angus that he'd be taking his leave. A minute later, he walked on the street and looked at different stores around him. He excitedly planned to test his skill. Then he used the Eyes of Truth and was amazed to see the fruits, things, and armor qualities and conditions. But he noticed that he can't use it on people, although he knows that his new ability is sure handy. He grabbed one of the oranges and wondered if it is how everyday things look to Nay. He'll ignore that it would have gotten him duped if it weren't for that ability and only buy good ones. The lady who was selling the potion offered him another, but he took the one he chose. Then the shopkeeper of leather asked him for his decision, and he replied that he was buying that belt. The bookkeeper couldn't believe that he can read, but he knew that it was a bargain, so he'd regret not purchasing those. Later, people looked at him because they thought he had a lot of things on him, but he just carried the box full of things with a fragile warning and tried to steady himself while carrying everything. He was glad to buy everything he wanted but was sad that he had no money left. It's been 2 months since he became an adventurer, and most adventurers see him as the guild's go-to-errand runner and handyman, often tasked with simple or punitive missions meant for novices or rule breakers. Few truly regard him as a genuine adventurer, and his rank remains at G+. If promoted to F-, he'd be assigned quests to the city walls, but the guild assessed his physical prowess as insufficient. One man called him to come to the courtyard, and there the adventurers were practicing. The guild martial arts instructor, Daz, told him that he had gotten leaner since the last time he saw him and he may participate in their training. He excitedly looked at his training sword and was worried they hated him since he couldn't train for 2 months. But then Daz told him to show him his potential. Suddenly, Daz attacked him, but he jumped in time to avoid it, making Daz tell him that he had good reflexes. Then he forcefully stopped his feet to go to his position, raised his sword up, held it tightly, and swung it to attack back. But Daz easily blocked it and told him that he was wasting too much movement swinging his sword. Then Daz swung his wooden sword around while telling him to brace himself and attack him, which hit his cheek. Then he fell to the ground while Daz told him that he let his guard down. Then Daz gave his hand to help him and told him that he had potential. Daz also told him that if he understood the basics of battle, he'd become strong. But first, they needed to do something about his stance, to which he replied yes. He only got busier from there because he cleaned up the guild, he ran errands for quests, and had martial arts training. So at the end of the day, he would lay on his bed, feeling tired. He thought it was great and all, but there has got to be a faster method. He thought he'd tidy up and hit the sack for now. Then he used his purify to purify himself. But then he realized something, and if maybe he can clean the guild with Purify. How potent is his magic to begin with? So he planned to give his room a go for starters. He put his hand on the floor and used his Purify to clean his room. Then a minute later, every corner in his room was shining in cleanliness. He noticed that the walls were originally white and that he still had magic in the tank. So he planned to stretch it further and tried to purify the entire guild. After that, he peeked and didn't hear something, so he turned around to leave, knowing that he should walk around to see if anything changed. But when he was about to walk, he felt pain in his body and slammed to the ground hard. Someone ran toward his room in a panic, and Leo asked him if he had done it. But he just tiredly laughed. A few moments ago, Leo, Ne, and the adventurers were shocked to see the guild being purified, and panicky asked what it was. He tiredly apologized to Leo and told him that it was probably him, making Leo panic and ask if he was okay. Leo told him that he must have run out of mana and called him a fool, telling him not to use Purify on the smallest of things. Normally, he'd use it against the undead or to lift curses off items. Leo picked him up and told him to use Cleanse for regular cleaning. Then Leo put him down on the bed and advised him to get some rest for the day, but he told Leo that he was still not done. Still, Leo told him that he'd regain mana once he sleeps. The next morning, using Purify yesterday freed up his schedule, so instead of cleaning, he had more time to practice his swordsmanship. However, the training was mostly just repetitive basic drills. Daz told them to train until it becomes second nature, and the mock battle begins once they have that down. He was notably younger and smaller than the other trainees, and some of them even had their own unique, self-taught sword styles. His ascent into the world of adventurers was clearly a rarity. He remembers Ne telling him that there is a reason they don't just hand out higher ranks to everybody because they need to ensure the quality of their adventurers. After all, it was a profession full of risks, so they can't have just anyone diving into it without being serious. He lifted his wooden sword up and swung it down, thinking that he was lucky. Later, behind Angus's workshop, he called Angus, and Angus excitedly told him that he arrived there. Then Angus slapped his back happily while telling him that he managed to forge blades like never before because of him, so he owes him one. Angus lifted a beautiful sword while proudly telling him that he forged its short blade for him and asked him if he will take it. He takes the sword and thanks Angus so much, but Angus tells him not to because he should consider it a gift from him, just to say thanks. He activated his eyes of truth and saw that its price is 15G. Knowing that a single gold coin is approximately 10,000 yen, he was shocked to realize that the sword is worth 150,000 yen. Angus asked him what he meant by 150k yen, and he replied that it is nothing, then asked Angus if perhaps he adds something to it. Angus couldn't believe that he could tell and told him that every now and then, his ability, called throw in a bonus. He made a sword a while back and accidentally gave it a +1 in skill, so people went nuts over it. Hearing it, he was shocked and shaking as he looked at the sword. Then he noticed that its agility is +5 and its skills are +2. He thinks people already went crazy over a +1 enhancement, so he wonders what more if they see his sword that was +2. 6 months later, he thinks that it has been half a year since he regained the memories of his past life. The memories from his past life were mostly in the form of acquired knowledge, but their benefits can't be overlooked. It's like those isekai fantasy stories where the characters use their advanced knowledge to dominate another world. But after some research, he has realized that his knowledge can be a double-edged sword. He looked at the newspaper and fearfully read that a vagabond died from a monster attack. Then he heard someone asking his friend if that person was the rumored vagabond who appeared at the commercial guild's office for registration. His friend replied that it wasn't very smart of him to register without any backing. He remembered that the vagabond wanted to apply for a patent, apparently, but his idea was claimed under a noble's name. The very next day, his body was found in the forest just outside of town. He knows that applying advanced technology there may not go as easily as he thought it would. He noticed one of the participants swinging too much, which is risky. When that participant's opponent saw the opening, he put his wooden sword near the participant's neck. Toro knows that it was a plain attack but a practical one, saying it. He came up with an idea and excitedly shouted that he'll go with something that looks plain but is hard to imitate practically. Later, with that in mind, he baked some of his favorite bread from his past life. He knew that in that world, hygiene practices were extremely unacceptable because they didn't even practice washing their hands. So, it was challenging just to bake some bread using yeast. But he thinks if his plan succeeds, he'll be able to make some nice, fluffy bread and eat it. Also, he knows that with purification, he'll eliminate only the microorganisms, and he successfully made a yeast. While he was busy in the kitchen, Ne saw him and wondered what he was doing. Then she asked him what he was planning to do with that fruit soaked in sugar water, and he replied that he was going to make bread with it. Nay asked him if he really meant bread, not dessert, and he confidently replied yes. Then he explained to her that he could use that to make soft, white bread from flour, bread that she had never seen before. She excitedly asked him if it was the luxury white bread the rich eat and told him that she wanted to do it too. He told her that first, they should mix the yeast with the dough, to which Nay replied she understood. Then he told her that second, they should knead the dough until it becomes smooth. Third, let it sit for about an hour to rise, and next, they will bake the raised dough, but there is no oven, so they'll use a pan to cook the dough. After heating it for a few minutes, it was done. He told her that it was not so fluffy since it was cooked in a pan, but it was fine. She told him that it had that faint fruity smell, and outside the kitchen, Leo and the others smelled the bread too. Leon rushed inside the kitchen and asked them if they made bread, to which he replied yes. Then he told Leo that it was soft and fluffy white bread. Leo grabbed one of the bread and wondered what kind of bread it is because it is crusty on the outside, yet so soft on the inside. Leo and Nay ate the bread and both liked its taste. Nay told him that he was incredible because not only he could read, write, and do calculations, but he could also bake bread. He smiled awkwardly, knowing that he was not originally from that world, so he knew many things. The building next to the Adventurers Guild serves as a canteen pub, which is also managed by the guild, and it's usually a hangout spot for adventurers and people alike. When they added the white bread, meat, and vegetable sandwich to the menu, it became a hit within a week. Also, it even increased the number of ordinary customers, and it was Toro's creation, but they made it the Sacy Guild branch's exclusive specialty. Toro could eat good food and receive shelter from the guild, so it was a win-win situation for him. He was busy thinking that he liked the bread, but he also liked rice just as much. But it looked like rice wasn't a staple food in that world because they treat rice as a typical weed they use to feed their livestock, making him cryingly shout that they have gotta be kidding him. But then he thinks that it was his duty as a former Japanese to spread the wonders of rice, but he knows that it was really not his duty. But he still wants to eat it, so he tried talking to Leo about it. But Leo replied that he never heard of it, so he decided to serve Leo bread made with rice flour. Leo looked at the rice flour bread and was about to grab one while telling him that he didn't know about it. Leo bit it and was shocked. Leo told him that it had a different texture compared to the wheat bread and it was chewier, and it's pretty tasty. Then Leo pulled the rice flour bread in half and noticed that it was sticking to each other. Leo agreed and told him that they'd start selling rice bread, making him excitedly shout yes. A few days later, he noticed that the rice flour bread seemed quite popular, making him proudly say it was awesome and knows that he should think about a main course made from rice. He wonders if maybe an easy-to-eat bowl. Then he begins to cook the rice, and since they don't use chopsticks there, he'll make it spoon-friendly by dicing the monster meat. Then saute it with some seasonings. After it is cooked, put the meat on top of the rice and top it off with the sauce made from the meat juices. Then he successfully made his easy-to-eat bowl dish. Thus, another hit menu item was created, and the people were amazed, wondering how livestock feed tasted that amazing. Then one day, he put the sauce in the bowl and finished the Chazyuk-style dish. He grabbed one spoon to eat and was about to put it in his mouth when the voice told him that his skill activation, the conditioned food evangelist, was completed, so he had acquired plant knowledge, making him wonder what the heck it was and think that a useless ability was bound to show up one way or the other. Once again, he heard the voice that he had acquired plant knowledge, but he didn't feel anything inside him, making him wonder why he didn't feel any changes even though he gained an ability. So, he planned to look at the garden plants, but when he was in the garden, he noticed that nothing was happening, and his brain wasn't showing anything. He guessed maybe if he appraised them, he could get a result. Then it showed him that weed is common grass that can be found growing anywhere, making him shocked because he knows that they are weeds, but the truth was they are weed. He excitedly says that he takes his words back because it might be a useful ability. Later, in the guild hall, adventurers were talking around, and he was holding a G-rank cat search quest in progress while telling Nay that Teja Gramps is out at the moment and asking if he can leave Tabby, who is the cat, there with her. She replied, of course, and just to make sure to mark it in the ledger that he was safe now because with it, that quest is officially complete. He gave Tabby to Nay while telling it to stay put, and Nay told him that she felt like Tabby spent more time at the guild than at home. Then she asks him if he can lend her his adventurer tag before. He takes off his tag while asking her why and gives it to her. She told him that he'd see in a moment while playing with Tabby. She put the lock on Tabby's neck while telling it to wait there and went to the magic printer while telling Toro that he should wait there too. Then she clicked the magic printer open and put Toro's tag inside of it. Then the magic printer proceeded to work. After it, she grabbed the new tag and congratulated Toro on his promotion to F rank. He saw his tag with his name that increased to F rank minus and excitedly thanked Nay for it. She asks him how about he take on an F rank quest since he was there, and he replies that he will and he'll get ready. Then he speedily ran away, making Nay notice that Toro totally forgot about the ledger. He opened his room door, put on his cap, grabbed his sword, and put on his gear immediately. Then he speedily grabbed the quest with a picture of the herbs and put it on the desk while excitedly telling Nay that he'll take on that quest, making Nay shocked, noticing that it was an herb gathering quest, and tells him that she was expecting him to go for a hunting quest, especially since he got that sword from Angus. He told her that it was true, but he also had other things that he'd like to try out. Later, he thought he had arrived at the quest place and something made him believe it was the right spot. So, he used his plant appraisal skill. He spotted the weed, a healing grass used for treating minor injuries, and the straw mushroom, an ingredient for making soup. This excitedly confirmed his suspicions. He placed down his large basket, grabbed the healer grass, and pulled it out. With his ability, he could easily spot and gather herbs, making it efficient. He then started picking the healer grass, poisu grass for detoxifying, and other grasses until his basket was full. He couldn't believe he gathered that much in just 2 hours, but he worriedly realized he might have ventured too deep into the forest. Putting the basket on his back, he decided to retrace his steps. However, he heard something moving in the bushes. He peeked to see what it was, but suddenly, a goblin emerged from the bush. He immediately crouched down to hide, wondering why it was there. He looked at his sword, thinking that if it was just one goblin, he might have a chance if he surprised it. In typical fantasy scenarios, he was supposed to defeat it there. Besides, he also wanted to test out that sword. However, for some reason, he couldn't stop shaking. Despite this, he knew he had to act, so he quickly stood up to surprise attack it. Unfortunately, he stepped on a branch, making a loud noise that filled him with horror. The goblin heard it and swung its axe towards his hiding spot to attack him. Fortunately, he managed to block it using his sword and tried to keep it from getting closer to him, albeit trembling. Then, the goblin forcefully threw his sword away. He immediately jumped to retrieve his sword from the ground while the goblin chased after him with its axe. When the goblin swung its axe toward him, he fell in time to avoid it and slipped behind it while gripping his sword. However, as he was about to draw his sword from its sheath, he trembled in fear when he saw the goblin behind him and cried out as the goblin swung its axe toward him. He waited nervously for the goblin's attack, but then his sword suddenly lit up and emitted a powerful light, causing the goblin to miss. The system displayed a +5 agility notification, leaving him wondering what was happening. When he lifted his feet, he found himself moving swiftly, leaving the goblin shocked and fearful as he ran away like the wind, thus escaping safely. Afterward, he continued his F-rank herb gathering quest and dedicated his free time to sword training. He even began experimenting with potion making, using books as his guides. He also started learning blacksmithing from Angus and, recently, had been practicing archery. The reason for his diverse pursuits was his unique skill, Garbled Text, which had very specific activation conditions. Upon reincarnation, he regained memories from his past life. After purifying himself of 2 years' worth of impurities, he learned the skill of purification. Normally, accumulating so much impurity in just 2 years was unusual, and few people had the chance to bathe frequently. He obtained the eyes of truth through his adeptness at recognizing what experts held in high regard, something typically requiring years of knowledge, wisdom, and charisma. Thanks to his past life's knowledge, he became an expert in food and gained extensive knowledge about plants. Looking back, he realized that such extraordinary feats couldn't be achieved overnight in a normal life. His persistent nature drove him to try everything, hoping to meet the conditions to acquire more skills. Mob was astonished when an arrow accidentally hit his cape. Mob examined it closely and nervously called out to him. He quickly apologized but was then approached by someone who patted his shoulder. Daz advised him to take it easy. He knew he had dedicated his youth to getting transferred to another world, but it had turned out to be a reincarnation. Later, inside the guild where adventurers chatted busily, he sighed to himself, reflecting on how he had tried various things for about 1.5 years but hadn't truly mastered anything. He remembered introducing new items at the relaxing inn, which became instant hits, and teaching Angus how to craft a new weapon called a katana. He successfully hunted down a one-horned rabbit, marking his first monster hunt. He remembered that God had warned him it wouldn't be easy, and now he realized God wasn't wrong. He understood that he had gained valuable experience from all his experiments. He discovered that he could handle various tasks with dexterity, a rarity in a world filled with skills. Usually, those without skills were considered talentless, and mastering something without innate ability was nearly impossible. He wondered if his garbled text might have something to do with it. He slapped the table in frustration, suspecting he might be overthinking, and decided to head out for a herb gathering quest. Today, he planned to venture into the northeastern forest. He knew that if he kept going to the same woods, he'd deplete all the herbs. He remembered that the deeper he went into any forest, the rarer the herbs he found. But the deeper he went, the more he sensed the presence of monsters. They were mostly goblins, but in some areas, he might even encounter an orc or two. He considered wrapping up today's quest quickly, but then he spotted a pepper bells plant. He carefully collected it and placed it inside his basket. Then, he found another herb and excitedly exclaimed, "Jackpot," because he had found a mana flower. He also noticed some black grass, making him feel lucky. As he walked, he heard rustling in the bushes. He looked back, wondering if it was a rabbit or a goblin. Then he heard growling, causing him to sweat with fear. He immediately crouched down when he saw a goblin emerge from the bush while holding a rat. He grasped his sword and noticed it was indeed a goblin. With a trembling hand, he comes out of the bush while carefully drawing his sword from its sheath. However, the goblin, which had been about to eat the rat, simply looked at him, and he stared back at it. Suddenly, he sprinted away at full speed, leaving the goblin and the rat bewildered. While he was running away, a voice informed him that his special skill activation condition, the strong man who keeps running away from goblins, was confirmed. He couldn't believe it. The voice then revealed that he had acquired presence detection and a stealth cloak. He continued to run away while shouting incredulously, asking if they were seriously giving him skills now. Later, he safely returned to their guild house and saw many adventurers walking around. Then he activated his new stealth cloak skill and slowly faded away. He looked at his hand, wondering how good it was, and waved his hand to a man named Whisker to check if Whisker could see him. Then he said hello to a lady named Elra to confirm it. He smiled, wondering if he had succeeded, without noticing a hand approaching him from behind. The hand hit him on the head while shouting his name. He looked up to see who it was and saw an angry Leo telling him to choose the right place to use it. He awkwardly laughed in response, thinking that it seemed like some people could still see him. A moment later, he was in the forest picking herbs when he felt something coming toward him, causing him to look up and ask if there were monsters around. He hid behind a nearby tree and was relieved to see that it was just a horned rabbit. He thought he should kill it since horned rabbit meat is edible, the skin can be sold, and the horn can be used for medicine. He activated his stealth cloak and appeared behind the horned rabbit. Then he stabbed it, causing it to fall to the ground dead. He bent down to grab it, thinking that the stealth cloak's effect surely had its merits. Suddenly, he felt something approaching again, so he immediately hid behind the bush and wondered if it was another monster. He swung his sword at the man, making the man shout for him to wait and ask if it was Satu. He realized that the man was one of their guild members, Yelhai, and Yelhai told him to contact the guild. Then Yelhai explained to him that their team was currently fighting a group of goblins and needed backup because there were about 80 goblins. He replied that he understood and ran away swiftly, telling Yelhai to hang in there until the reinforcements arrived, to which Yelhai replied that they were counting on him. Minutes later, he forcefully opened the guild door and immediately told Leo that Five Arrow was engaged in battle with a group of about 80 goblins. Leo mentioned that it must be in the northeastern forest and ordered the man to quickly gather members ready for dispatch. After all the members were gathered, Leo informed them that Five Arrows was fighting the goblins to protect the city of Saci, and they couldn't abandon their guildmates, so they should lend them their strength. He also emphasized that it was the time for the Adventurers Guild to unite, to which they all agreed and cheered. Then Leo suggested they should split into 3 teams, the red team, blue team, and green team. He told him that the yellow team was his, and his task was to relay the situation among the teams. Leo also informed them that Roy and the red team would go to rescue the 5 arrows, and the green team would surround the goblins and trap them. He ordered him to guide them to the 5 arrows and work as their messenger. Leo concluded by saying that if all teams collaborated well, the operation would succeed, and no one would die, to which they all replied with a resounding yes. Meanwhile, in the forest, Whisker asked his team when the reinforcements would arrive because he was running out of arrows. The man told him to stay calm because they would be there soon. A moment later, while Whisker and the others were still fighting, Roy and the red team arrived to help them. Whisker remarked that they had taken forever. Roy ordered Toro to let the blue team know to secure an escape route, to which Toro replied with an okay and told Roy to take the potions with them. Roy grabbed them and asked if they weren't valuable and if he was sure. Toro replied that it was alright, he had made them himself, so he was sure they worked fine. Then he used his stealth cloak and told Roy that he would convey the message to the blue team right away. A moment later, he arrived at the blue team and asked them if they could secure an escape route. The man replied that it would help if the green team could divert the enemy's attention for them. He replied that he understood and headed toward the green team to inform them that the blue team needed support. However, the lady told him that they hadn't anticipated that number of enemies, so they couldn't break free right now. She asked if he could ask HQ for more reinforcements. He then headed toward HQ and told Leo that the situation was dire, with too many goblins, and they needed reinforcements. He also informed Leo that all teams were pinned down by the goblins and were requesting assistance. Leo acknowledged the situation and instructed him to return to the guild and update the other members. Afterward, he should rest up because they could handle the rest. Leo and his team immediately advanced and faced a swarm of goblins running toward them to attack. Leo swung his axe forward, cutting off the heads of the goblins in front of him. However, a goblin appeared at his side, startling him. Fortunately, Daz swiftly cut the goblin into pieces. Leo infused his axe with some of his power while thanking Daz and slammed it onto the ground, breaking it into pieces and sending the goblins flying into the air. Daz swiftly attacked every goblin in the air while responding to Leo that there was no problem. Meanwhile, Mob raised his sword and swung it forward, killing many goblins in one stroke. He shouted that they were so cool, but then he realized that he needed to return to the guild. He immediately ran to the guild house and opened the door, prompting the adventurers inside to ask him worriedly how it went. He exhaustively told everyone that Leo and the others were on their way, so it should be okay. Just to be sure, maybe someone could. But before he could finish his sentence, he slowly fell to the floor and collapsed, making everyone run toward him in worry. Later, he opened his eyes in shock and immediately sat up, seeing everyone there and feeling relieved that everyone was safe. Roy told him that the potions he had given them really helped because thanks to them, they could fight without worrying about getting hurt. He told Roy that he was just relieved everyone was safe, and it was the least he could do. However, Roy told him that he was talking nonsense and thanked him for relaying the messages between teams because 5 arrows had been saved. He knew that he had done his part, but despite it, he still felt uneasy about not having any combat skills. Somehow, he felt more adept at swordsmanship than anything else, but it was not enough because he'd like to test his abilities against goblins. However, they moved in groups, so it was dangerous to fight them alone. He realized that joining a team to fight alongside would be ideal, but he wondered who would accept a kid like him. Then he opened the door to his room, knowing that in the end, what he needed to do was stay the same. He lay on his bed, guessing that it was back to training again tomorrow. The next day, an old lady walked into their guild, greeting everyone with a good day. Several days after the goblin battle, he noticed a quest on the bulletin board and grabbed it. He then approached Nay and told her that he'd like to take that quest. However, a man suddenly appeared in front of him, leaving him confused. Guild staff member Marco thanked him for his hard work and informed him that he would handle the quest paperwork. Confused, he asked Marco where Nay was and inquired about her absence from the guild. Marco whispered to him that it seemed Nay's parents had come unexpectedly. He asked Marco why they were whispering all of a sudden, and Marco replied that they mentioned something about matchmaking. He told Marco that it sounded serious, and Marco informed him that many adventurers were interested in Nay too. Suddenly, the man shouted and asked them if it was true, leaving both of them surprised. The man then shouted to everyone to listen and revealed that there was a matchmaking proposal for Nay, shocking everyone. Many men expressed their dismay, with one of them saying he thought he had something special with Nay, and another crying for his beloved Nay. However, his friend reminded him that Nay did not belong to him alone, as she belonged to all of them. Others vowed to drive away the potential suitor, and another man shouted that he wouldn't forgive that person, prompting the lady in the center to tell everyone to calm down. Roy asked Toro if he hadn't heard anything, and Toro replied that he hadn't. Roy and the other men fell into a silent despair. Then, one of the men angrily asked him why Nay had favored him, calling him a useless brat. He wondered why he was getting dragged into this situation. Suddenly, someone grabbed his shoulder, and Roy told him to follow Nay today and report back to them. He asked Roy why it had to be him and mentioned that he couldn't because he had already applied for a quest. He asked Marco to confirm it, but Marco informed him that he could go because he hadn't processed the quest yet, which irritated him. He thought to himself for Marco to do his work, and in the end, he agreed to follow Roy's request. Before leaving, he told the man who had shouted at him earlier that if anything happened, he would take responsibility, but the man simply told him to go and they would be waiting for his report. Roy wished him good luck. A moment later, he was on the roof of one of the houses, knowing that Nay should be around there. He spotted her and thought he had found his target. He wondered who the man next to her was and if he was her rumored matchmaking candidate. He noticed that the man looked quite impressive, which could be bad news for everyone. However, he knew he needed to verify things first. He jumped off the roof and landed on a pile of dried grass, surprising everyone nearby. He peeked to get a better look at them and stood up, thinking that he had recognized something suspicious about the distance between them. Suddenly, an old man approached him and asked if he was okay after falling from up there. He gestured to the old man to be silent, and when he looked back at Nay and the man, he was shocked to see that they had disappeared. He ran away swiftly, ignoring the old man's calls to wait up. He was preoccupied with the thought that he needed to find out what was happening between those two, or else the guild would be in chaos. He then imagined the man professing his love to Nay and proposing marriage, causing Nay to blush in surprise. He envisioned them falling in love, which led to him shouting in frustration. He wondered how he would break the news to everyone in the guild if Nay got engaged. Suddenly, a hand touched his shoulder and Nay asked him what he was doing there. He nervously asked Nay who that man was but quickly covered his mouth, realizing what he was saying. Nay, looking confused, explained that the man had asked for directions, and she had helped him. She mentioned that her parents were there and invited him to join them for a meal. Shortly after, a warm meal was prepared, and he found himself sitting with Nay and her parents. He couldn't resist asking if the matchmaking story was true, causing Nay to spit out her coffee. A few days earlier, Nay's mother had arrived at the guild and approached Nay, surprising her. They began to chat, while Marco eavesdropped, wondering if the woman was Nay's mother and what they were discussing. He overheard Nay's mother suggesting that if Nay didn't have a boyfriend, she should consider matchmaking. Back in the present, Nay told him that it was just a joke her mother had made, prompting him to tell Marco in his mind to cut him some slack. Nay's mother apologized to him and explained that Nay had told her she hadn't dated anyone, so she thought matchmaking might be helpful. Nay's father jokingly suggested he could consider marrying their daughter when he's older, leading Nay to tell her father to stop bothering him. He noticed that they appeared to be a close-knit family from their warm interactions, making him wonder how his parents from his previous life were doing. Feeling sad, he thought that his parents must be devastated by his mysterious death, especially after gaining admission to one of the most prestigious universities. All he had done was cause them problems. Nay, concerned, asked if he was alright, and he replied that he was fine. He swore that he would do well in this world to make his parents proud. The next day, he was sweating in fear as he looked at someone and fidgeted without saying a word. Roy and another man were also sweating in fear. The rest of the men were on the ground, kneeling in front of him, while Leo observed them all. Leo cracked his fingers in anger as he looked at the men, with the lady in the center asking what had happened. Before she could get an answer, Nay heard Marco laughing and telling everyone that he wondered how that matchmaking story had unfolded after they had sent Tauro to tail Nay. He looked at the kneeling people in front of him and told them that they still had their quests, so they should just drop the matter. Leo, however, told him that he was also a victim of their mischief, so it was okay to be upset. Leo angrily scolded the men, stating that using a child to spy on a guild staff member's personal life was shameful. Nay tried to defend them, saying it didn't bother her, so they should be forgiven. Everyone thought Nay was kind, like an angel, but when Leo smiled at them, the color drained from their faces, and they saw a formidable lion before them. Leo told them to consider themselves lucky, and he sentenced them to a month of errand quests. This decision left them in defeat and shock. Errand quests were known for being boring, harsh, dirty, and poorly paid. The ones at that time of year were even more demanding, involving repairing the city wall, which included extracting stones, transporting them, and stacking them. It was all heavy labor, and due to the low rewards, it was one of the less popular quests. Additionally, when Tauro was in the G rank, he wasn't strong enough to take on such tasks. They remembered Leo telling them that the reward wasn't that bad this time, and it seemed they had allocated a generous budget. However, Roy and the men with him were already exhausted just by looking at it. A moment later, they heard someone hitting a stone and saw men working hard at the quarry. For some reason, Tauro was also there, but he wasn't interested in transporting or stacking rocks. He had come because he believed that the eyes of the truth might be useful. He looked up and noticed someone, an old man, telling them to get to work. However, before they started, he insisted on teaching them the basics. He pointed to a rock and asked if they could see it. Then, he instructed them to find its center and strike. The rock shattered into pieces. He encouraged them to try it for themselves, leaving them shocked and unable to believe that this was all the explanation they received. They began to work while the old man explained that sometimes the stones had valuable materials inside them. If they found something, they should let him know, and if it was valuable, they'd be rewarded. Afterward, he decided to try something and activated his Eyes of the Truth skill. He looked around and saw coal rocks everywhere, but then he noticed something shining. He faced the shining rock, wondering what it was. As he raised his pickaxe to hit it, the old man told him that those piles were waste rock, so he could ignore them. Nevertheless, he still struck the rock with his axe, and a light emanated from it. They looked at it in surprise, and when the light disappeared, it revealed a piece of mithril ore with an S rarity. The old man shouted in disbelief and asked everyone to stop what they were doing because it was mithril ore. The system tells him that the condition he who unearths treasure with a single strike was confirmed, so he had acquired precision. He shouted that he had only swung the pickaxe once. Days passed, and he still didn't quite understand his new ability called precision. However, he realized that precision was involved in things like what he was doing. He remembered something called precision shooting and continued hitting the targets in the center while thinking that it would come in handy. Later, as the sun went down, Marco gave him a bag of money, telling him that it was 100 gold coins for the mithril, and asked him what he was going to do with all that money. He replied that there was something he had wanted to do, and he knew that he owed his survival in that world to everyone there. He shouted to everyone that the food and drinks were on him today, which made everyone cheer and start to drink and have fun. Then he saw Nay and asked her if she had any ideas on what to do with the remaining money. She suggested donating to the orphanage, just like Mob had done. This amazed him, and he agreed, telling Mob in his mind that he was as manly as always. The next day, the old man outside the guild asked him if it was true that the guild's kid had found mithril ore. He replied that everyone at the quarry had witnessed it. Meanwhile, inside the guild house, everyone was gathered, laughing and teasing Tauro. They told him they had heard he had been dealing with bad guys and had brought a dead old man back to life. He shouted at them, saying that there was no way either of those rumors was true, and asked what he was supposed to do if such rumors spread. Roy called him and assured him that he had denied those rumors for him, knowing that they would trouble him. Tauro looked back at them with tears in his eyes and thanked them for their help. He was grateful for everyone's assistance but knew he needed to address those rumors. Well guys, that's the end of the video. If you like this video, comment part 2 in the comments section. Also subscribe to the channel, hit the bell and like the video. Thank you for watching and see you next time again.